All right, so you sent over this lecture, Dr. Zakir Naik, at, what was it, Jamiat Rashid.
Jamiat Rashid, yep.
And I gotta say, there's a lot to unpack here. Technology, different Islamic schools of thought, even engaging with governments. It's quite the deep dive.
It is, and all through this lens of Dawah, right?
Yeah.
Which, just in case anyone's tuning in for the first time, that's the idea of inviting others to understand Islam, to learn about it.
It's about sharing the message. Right.
Ab-
And that's actually what I found so interesting about Dr. Naik's take on technology, because he seems to really embrace it.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from it at all.
Not at all. In fact, he practically calls for like a Muslim revolution in AI.
It's almost like he's flipping the script. You have this stereotype sometimes, especially with scholars in more traditional faiths, that they're kind of like wary of new technology.
Right, like it's a threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Dr. Naik is saying, no, we need to be at the forefront of this.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity.
Yeah, it's like he's laying down a challenge. He even uses that phrase, mastering AI. What do you think he means by that? Like, what does that actually look like?
Well, he gets pretty specific, actually. He sees AI as this incredible tool for dawah. Imagine like high-quality Islamic content lectures, talks, even just like basic explanations of Islamic concepts, all instantly translated into dozens of languages, all powered by AI.
It's about reaching people, right? Breaking down those language barriers. I noticed he mentioned his own lectures in Urdu.
Absolutely. He's thinking about how to bring those teachings to a wider audience, people who maybe don't speak Urdu, but could benefit from his message.
And it's AI that can make that happen.
Exactly. And it's that urgency in his voice.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, AI is kind of cool, we should look into that. It's like, no, this is happening now, and we need to be leading the charge.
It's about shaping how this technology is used.
Absolutely. He's saying we can't just be passive consumers. We need to be active creators, innovators.
But I can already hear some of our listeners like pausing that last bit and thinking, hold on a minute. Isn't some technology haram? Like, where do we draw the line?
And you know what? Dr. Nike actually addresses that very tension.
He does.
He does. He acknowledges that there are always going to be those voices, those who are quick to label anything new, anything unfamiliar as forbidden. It's like a reflex.
Your knee-jerk reaction, right? New tech, haram.
Exactly. But he pushes back on that with a really interesting example, actually. He talks about microphones.
Microphones.
Microphones in mosques. Something we take for granted now.
Right, so something as commonplace as a microphone was once seen as controversial.
Oh, absolutely. Back in the day, people were really debating it.
Yeah.
Some argued that using a microphone to amplify the imam's voice was somehow interfering with the sanctity of the prayer, that it wasn't pure anymore.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So how did he use that to make his point about AI?
Well, he used it to illustrate how the principles of Islam haven't changed. What's changed are the tools we use to apply those principles.
So it's about understanding the intention and the context, not just reacting to the technology itself.
Exactly. And he actually makes a similar point about Islamic banking.
Right. He talks about facing pushback for his stance on that.
He even shares this anecdote. He doesn't go into detail, but he mentions facing criticism from within the Muslim community about his views on certain aspects of Islamic banking.
So even on something as established as Islamic banking, there are still these debates, these disagreements about how to apply Islamic principles in a modern context.
Right. And what I found really interesting is that he doesn't shy away from those debates. He leans into them. He even talks about how he welcomes those challenging conversations.
Even if they get a little uncomfortable.
Even if they get uncomfortable.
Right.
Because as he sees it, that's how we grow. That's how we deepen our understanding.
It's not about blind acceptance, but it's also not about shutting things down just because they're different.
Exactly. It's about seeking knowledge. It's about engaging in those tough conversations. And maybe, just maybe, it's about being willing to have your own assumptions challenged along the way.
Because who knows, you might learn something.
Exactly. And especially with something like technology, where things are changing so rapidly.
We have to be ready to adapt.
We do.
Yeah.
He even talks about the importance of seeking guidance from experts in each field, right? So it's not just about having a deep understanding of Islamic principles. It's about bridging that gap between religious scholarship and these specialized fields.
You need both.
You need both. It's about bringing together the best of both worlds, those who are experts in Islamic knowledge and those who are experts in, say, artificial intelligence or biotechnology.
It's about collaboration. Okay, so we've established that Dr. Naik is not afraid of a little tech disruption, but how does he approach another potentially divisive area, the differences within Islam itself?
Yeah, this is where I think the lecture gets really interesting because He starts to dive into those different schools of thought, those different interpretations of Islam that sometimes, create a little bit of friction.
Can get a little sensitive.
He acknowledges that right away.
Yeah, I get a little nervous even bringing it up sometimes, It's like, oh, this is where things could go sideways.
He kind of jumps right in.
Yeah.
He knows it's one of those things that people maybe tiptoe around, but he says, look, Muslims, we actually agree on way more than you think.
He does use that 95% figure, right?
He does.
Like across the board, 95% common ground. That's a pretty powerful statement.
It is. It really is. And it's a good reminder for all of us, right? To focus on that shared ground, that common heritage, those core principles that unite us. Because the difference is, while they exist, they often pale in comparison to what we share.
Yeah, it's like, let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
But okay, so if we agree on 95%, where's that other 5% coming from? What are some of those things that people disagree on?
Well, he gives this great example, and it's actually kind of funny. He talks about hand placement during prayer. Have you heard about this?
Oh, yeah. Clasped or open.
Exactly. And even within those two camps, there are different variations. Like some people say, okay, clasp, but thumbs up. Others say, no, thumbs tucked in.
It seems so, I don't know, almost trivial when you put it like that. But I know people feel really strongly about it.
They do. And that's his point. He's saying, look, these are details, and while they might be interesting for theological debate, they shouldn't become a source of division. Because at the end of the day, he says what matters most is Tawheed, the oneness of God, that fundamental belief that underpins the entire faith.
Right. Sorry. So he's saying focus on that shared belief, that core principle, and don't get bogged down in these smaller, more debatable points of practice.
Exactly. And he actually backs this up with a verse from the Quran.
Which one?
Verse 3.64. It basically calls for unity, for coming together on that common ground, for emphasizing what unites us rather than what divides us.
So he's using scripture to support this idea of focusing on the core message, on Tawheed, over these more peripheral issues.
He is. And it's interesting, right? Because Dr. Naik himself, he's not exactly known for shying away from controversy.
Yeah, he's definitely a bit of a lightning rod.
He is. And I was actually kind of surprised at how he addresses that in this lecture.
What does he say?
He almost wears it as a badge of honor. He talks about getting death threats, even because of his views, because of the platform he has.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. But he seems to see it as a sign that he's doing something right. Like if he wasn't ruffling feathers, if he wasn't pushing boundaries, maybe he wouldn't be as effective in getting people to think critically about their own beliefs.
It's just like that saying, if you're not making enemies, you're probably not doing anything important.
Exactly. And I think that speaks to his courage, too. He's willing to stand up for what he believes in, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous.
Okay, so we've talked about technology, and we've gotten into this often thorny territory of navigating differences within Islam itself. What about engaging with the wider world, specifically with governments? Because that's another area where things can get really complicated, especially for Muslim leaders in today's political climate.
Yeah.
Like, how do you even begin to navigate that?
Well, and this is where I think his approach gets really, I don't know, it's unexpected in some way.
Unexpected. Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
Well, you might think, given how outspoken he is on other issues, that he'd be all about, direct confrontation, calling out injustice, challenging authority, that kind of thing.
Right, especially with the political climate being what it is for Muslims in a lot of parts of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he actually advocates for something much more, I don't know, measured, thoughtful. He talks about the importance of respect, even when dealing with people who might be hostile towards Islam. He even uses this phrase, I wrote it down, private counsel over public shaming.
So it's more about working behind the scenes, trying to build bridges rather than, like, grandstanding.
It seems to be. He actually shares this anecdote about being approached by, I think it was an Indian political party. He doesn't say which one.
Ooh, juicy. Okay, tell me more. Did he spill the tea?
He doesn't give us the details, unfortunately, just mentions that he's had offers, from people in positions of power.
Interesting. So they're reaching out to him. They want to hear what he has to say.
Exactly. And he even hints that some of these offers have been, tempting, like positions of influence, opportunities to maybe shape policy from the inside.
But he seems hesitant.
He does. And this is where that idea of private counsel comes in. He believes that one-on-one dialogue, even with people you vehemently disagree with, has the power to change hearts and minds. He even compares it to, like, giving advice to a friend.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy.
He's saying you wouldn't necessarily, publicly shame your friend for making a mistake, right?
Yeah.
You'd pull them aside, talk to them privately, offer advice with love and respect.
It's that whole speak the truth, even if your voice shakes idea.
Exactly. But do it with wisdom, do it with compassion, and do it in a way that's actually going to be effective.
So not just speaking truth to power, but speaking truth with power.
Yes. And that's what he seems to be getting at.
Yeah.
And, he contrasts this with public criticism, which he says, while sometimes necessary, can often backfire.
People get defensive.
Exactly. They put up walls, they become less receptive to what you're actually saying.
It's like that saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Exactly. And he even takes it a step further. He makes this kind of unexpected comparison. He talks about being a good cop.
A good cop. Okay, now that's an image I wasn't expecting.
Right. But it makes sense when you think about it. He's saying, focus on the positive, acknowledge the good that the government is doing, and then privately, in that one-on-one space, offer constructive criticism and advice. Always with respect. Always with the genuine desire to find solutions.
It's a very strategic approach, almost diplomatic.
Exactly. And I think that's key, because he's not naive. He understands the complexities of power, the challenges of engaging with those who might not share your values.
But he's also not cynical.
No. And that's what I find so inspiring. He hasn't given up hope. He still believes in the power of dialogue, the power of persuasion. And he reminds us that, as Muslims, our ultimate goal in all of this should be seeking Allah's pleasure, not personal gain or political ambition.
Right, it's about serving a higher purpose.
Exactly. It's about approaching these interactions with sincerity, with a sense of duty, and with the understanding that real lasting change takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a willingness to engage even when it's difficult.
Wow, so many layers to unpack there. It really makes you think differently about civic engagement. It's not just about rights and responsibilities. It's about approaching it almost like, I don't know, a spiritual practice in a way. Doing it with intention, with sincerity, with a sense of higher purpose.
Absolutely. And realizing that even those small, quiet conversations, those one-on-one interactions, can have a ripple effect. You might not change the world overnight, but you might plant a seed, you might open someone's heart, you might shift a perspective just enough to create real change over time.
And those small changes can eventually add up to something much bigger.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. So much to think about. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. I feel like we both learned a lot today.
Me too. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us for another thought-provoking episode. We'll leave you with this, what resonated with you most from Dr. Naik's message. How might his insights inspire you to navigate the complexities of our world? Let us know in the comments below, and until next time, keep those brains engaged.